Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to our latest Evidence in Practice session at the Youth Endowment Fund. We're absolutely delighted that you can join us today. My name's Gail Gibbons. I'm Head of Change at the Youth Endowment Fund, and I'm here with my colleague Violetta Tattoo. We've got some really fantastic speakers. That we think you'll find the conversations very stimulating, and we really encourage you to, as they speak, to pose any questions that you might have in the chat, or else at the end of Steph and Joe's presentation, we will have a chance for Q&A before I move on to Leandra. Before I introduce our speakers, just a bit of housekeeping. We are going to be recording the session today. And we do upload the recording onto the YEF website along with the slides. If you don't want your face featuring on there forevermore on our website, feel free to turn your camera off. But what we are aware of is that it will still keep your name there. So if you also don't want us to display your name on our website, then just let us know about that, and we'll see what we can do about it. We have an hour and a half today from 2 till 3:30. As I said, we've got some really interesting speakers. Do ask as many questions as you like. Hopefully they'll be able to answer. So first of all, we've got Steph Waddell and Joe Flanagan from Foundations. Steph is an assistant director there, and Joe is a senior local development advisor. And they're going to be talking about their research and report on how family support services work for minority ethnic families. So some really interesting research that they've coordinated in partnership with the Race Equality Foundation and Action for Children. We'll then have a little pause for any questions and answers before we then move on to introducing Leandra Box from the Race Equality Foundation, who is going to be primarily talking about a specific programme that they run for Black, Asian and minority ethnic families, which is called Strengthening Families, Strengthening Communities, which is doing some really good stuff. And I think, Leandra, you might also be talking a bit more about some of your wider work at the Race Equality Foundation. Whilst you're listening, I'd urge you to keep your mute buttons on, otherwise we'll get an echo, unless, of course, you're asked to speak, in which case, obviously, unmute, that would be great. So without any further ado, I think, is it Steph, are you speaking first? Or is it Joe? I don't know which way around it is. Joe, it is. So Joe, I'll pass over to you and take it from there.
Thanks, Gail. Well, thank you for joining us today for the webinar on our subject, which is evidence and practice leaders and how we can work with them to tackle racial disparities for families in England. I'm here today with Steph, and we're going to run through some of the work that we've been doing in Foundations recently around equality, diversity, inclusion and equity. So a quick word about what this session is and what it's not. We're going to describe the journey that we've been on as a What Works Centre to understand the nature of racial disparities in family support, how local public services are responding to this, and what this means for our collective leadership roles. We're not coming to you as experts, but with a set of answers. We're on our own journey, helped by the people with lived experiences. So that's the families themselves and the people working in public services. What we are offering you today is the opportunity to hear what we've heard on our journey and some time to reflect on what this means for leaders of public services, with a particular focus on meeting the needs of local communities, building workforce skills and culture, and using evidence to drive change. So we've joined you today to share the findings from our recent work and to profile the way family support services work for minority ethnic families, and to share insights from local authority leaders about taking action. We'll use our review findings to give you the opportunity to share and explore what evidence and practice leaders need to do to tackle racial disparities for families in England. and we look forward to discussing this with you in the Q&A. We also have a practical reason for joining you today. We want you to help us to develop and grow our work on race equality, diversity, inclusion and equity, and also grow our network of colleagues who also have an interest in this work. So first of all, some introductions. Foundations is the new What Works Centre for Children and Families. We were formed in December 2022 by the merger of the Early Intervention Foundation and the What Works Centre for Children's Social Care. We're a research into practice organisation established by but independent of central government. The new organisation reflects the best of the previous two charities. We draw on the rigorous trial methods of the What Works Centre for Children's Social Care and the experience from the EIF of evidence synthesis and supporting local area leaders to use evidence. We retain a focus on providing support at the earliest possible stages, with a particular focus on the family context. So when I say family, we mean in all its forms. So family can be one of the most powerful conduits for almost every outcome that children experience. These relationships are fundamental to children's life chances and can be improved by high quality support, yet this is not always provided when needed. We don't always do enough to support family relationships or help children to thrive in their absence, and there are big gaps in evidence about what approaches to supporting family relationships work best in different contexts and for different families and communities. You can find more detail about our work in our strategy, Building the Foundations, and there'll be a link to this in a later slide. Our strategy is also explicit about taking action on race, equality, diversity, inclusion and equity. Acting on READY must be central to the activity of What Works centres. We know that there are stark and persistent inequalities in outcomes for children from minority ethnic groups. Some risk factors disproportionately affect certain ethnic groups. And we know that high quality family support delivered in the right way at the right time can make a real difference for children and their families. Many families struggle to access the support they need, and minority ethnic families may face additional specific challenges. The lack of a consistent national data set obscures our understanding of families' journeys through universal services and early help. We'll use our relationships with government and others to make sure that policy opportunities such as investment in family hubs and transformation of children's social care to explicitly take account of these disparities. Okay, so I'm going to hand over to Steph now, and she's going to talk to you about a piece of work that we did a couple of years ago called Speak Out. Over to you, Steph.
Hello, thanks, Jo. So this is a piece of work we did in 2022 with the Race Equality Foundation and with Action for Children. Really great collaboration. And it was the first step for us really in starting to understand, to sort of zoom in on the experiences of minority ethnic families in both seeking and accessing family support. So we wanted to carry out some research to understand these experiences and to start to provide a bit of a platform for the voices of minority ethnic children and families in policy making around family support, and to make recommendations about how services and indeed policy could better meet the needs of these families. So we heard from over 100 parents and nearly 60 young people through a qualitative survey, which we supplemented with some focus groups. So 2 focus groups for young people and 1 with parents. And the work was guided by a co-creation group of parents and young people who had experience of seeking family support and input on the design of the research. And it's fair to say that the voices represented in the research were very diverse, but it was obviously a small sample size. So what we can't do is make any meaningful comparative analyses across different ethnic groups or regions or support needs, for example. And we can't obviously allow for any population inference from the results. But In spite of those limitations, the analysis of our qualitative responses and the closed questions in the survey really painted a compelling picture of some common experiences, which I'll share with you. And of course, some of these challenges might also be shared by white British families, but some are clearly unique to minority ethnic families. So the first key finding was that experiences of discrimination and racism were commonly reported among the parents and young people who participated in the research. And these experiences related both to trying to access services and to the support that these families received from services if they did receive it. So 1 in 3 respondents to our survey felt that they were treated unfairly when seeking or receiving support from their family. And a further 24% told us that they weren't sure about whether they'd been treated fairly. And for some participants, this was directly linked to experiences of racism and discrimination. And for others, it was a broader sense that they hadn't been listened to or that their problems hadn't been taken seriously or had been minimised. And when trying to access support, some parents, for example, told us that they felt they'd been treated differently based on their ethnicity and that it had been harder for them to get support than it would have been for white British families. And young people also described experiences of receiving less support than their white peers, despite being in similar situations. And we heard about instances where young people felt they'd been denied access to support because the behaviour of their parents was attributed to cultural difference rather than being identified as the risk that it was and as a support need. Some parents and young people talked about underlying racism within services, and some parents had either experienced or were very conscious of the potential for racist stereotyping. And they talked about they or their children being or thinking that they were likely to be pathologized by service providers because of their ethnicity. So pretty stark key finding there. In terms of seeking support, so families and young people struggled to get the support they needed when they needed it. And we heard lots of examples of being unable to access family support in spite of multiple attempts to seek help. So some examples of parents waiting years to have their family's needs acknowledged or to receive support, and a sense of frustration that problems could have been prevented from escalating had they been addressed earlier and had they received the support they needed earlier on. So many parents talked about the barriers to getting the support they needed, which included a lack of information about available services, but also negative experiences at the first point of contact with services. We also heard about excessive waiting times for appointments, for referrals, for diagnoses, and particularly the case with waiting lists for children's mental health support, where sure lots of you won't be surprised to hear long waits for therapy or for mental health services. Some talked about difficulty of getting GP appointments. So I ought to have said that our research looked at universal services and referrals on from universal services, as well as early help and more specialist services. And due to long waiting lists, having to kind of chase up referrals, which resulted in additional stress and anxiety. Fair to say that there were some better experiences reported as well, so particularly very locally based support and arrangements by providers to kind of ease some of these access barriers, so childcare arrangements, for example, or reduced fees for accessing support, and some good experiences of being signposted via universal services to appropriate support. Oh, sorry. So crucially, a significant proportion of the parents and young people involved in our research said that the support that they did receive when they received it either made no difference or made things worse. Particular challenges identified were that interventions were seen as too generic or sometimes too brief to make a difference. There was a lack of cultural sensitivity within services. and also that services were not representative of the communities that they served, and that practitioners didn't always demonstrate an understanding of cultural or religious influences on family dynamics. And then related point really, but lack of practitioner skill more broadly in validating experiences, in kind of active listening and forming positive therapeutic relationships. But again, better experiences reported too. So I think fair to say better experiences and more cultural understanding when the professional was from a minority ethnic background themselves. Better experiences where the practitioner was simply skilled in forming positive therapeutic relationships. And participants told us that the things they needed were a judgment-free space, a practitioner who listened attentively to their needs, validated their feelings, and respected and empowered the autonomy of families. So, yeah, some of these issues, as you'll realise, are familiar issues. They may well have an impact across ethnic groups. We know that, early help services have suffered because of underinvestment and the need to focus resources on acute statutory services, for example. And we know that demand does commonly outstrip supply. And we also know that even when services are available, they're not always well matched or carefully matched to the need of families. So lots of challenges within the provision of family support more broadly. And we know that the kind of harsh reality is that lots of families won't receive support until problems reach crisis point or get worse. But it's also clear, in the context of wider statistics, other publications, this research, that minority ethnic families face additional barriers in accessing support that's appropriate for their needs. And our research really didn't support a hypothesis that minority ethnic families were less likely to seek support or recognise needs, for example. And indeed, what it painted a picture of was families very assertively trying to access the help that would make a difference to them, but facing lots of barriers along the way. Families' experiences of racism and discrimination is particularly concerning. So our policy and practice implications, sorry, there's a helicopter overhead, focus particularly on early help and family support services, but we also touched on the importance of access through universal services, including GPs and schools, for example, because many participants highlighted these as important as the first port of call or point of access. So the first recommendation we made was that policymakers needed to pay urgent attention to these experiences and their role in limiting access to effective early help and family support, and in perpetuating racial inequalities in respect of children's outcomes. So we said local services must commit to eradicating racism and clearly define how they would achieve this. That there must be clear routes for families to report concerns, the commitment to investigating these concerns, and that we needed to know more in order to help service providers to do how best to do this, to understand how best to do this. We needed to know more about effective approaches to eradicating racism and discrimination. And then secondly, that local authorities needed to ensure that families could access up-to-date and accurate information about family help services, including family hubs, and that the information provided about family hubs explicitly took account of the needs of minority ethnic families and was accessible to them. And we also said that local authorities must ensure that they regularly review minority ethnic families' experiences of navigating local services through the Family Hub network, and measure the extent to which families know how to get help and have been able to access the help that they need. So, yeah, as part of service planning, local areas needing to ensure that they understand the needs of minority ethnic families and that services are made available to meet those needs. So service providers needing to know whether their services are meeting the needs of these families. So monitoring and responding to data on the demographic characteristics of families receiving support, and access to services, and indeed retention in services. And then community-based organisations being an important part of the service offer in local areas, often well placed to meet to engage minority ethnic families given their understanding of the communities that they support. And these organisations often needing support to build their capacity, including, crucially, support to evaluate the impact of their own service offer and strengthen those service offers. And then workforce planning, we called for a nationally coordinated strategy to build capacity and skills across the early help and family support workforce, and said that this needed to include a core set of professional skills. So the skills needed to build trusting relationships with children and families, as well as a focus on cultural competence. And that these training, development and supervision arrangements must be underpinned by the best available evidence on what works, both in relation to these practitioner skills and in relation to the impact of different training, development and supervision approaches. So I'm going to hand back to Jo now to talk about the follow-on piece of work.
Thanks, Steph. So our next step was to explore what support for minority ethnic families looks like from the perspective of local authorities and their partners, a project that we call Developing Local Approaches to Improve Services for Minority Ethnic Children and Families. Through this work, we aim to understand how local authorities and their partners were responding to the challenges identified by families in the earlier work that Steph's just talked to you about. We wanted to highlight interesting practice and share learning and reflections from stakeholders across England. We also wanted to inspire further thinking about actions stakeholders could take, including research organisations like foundations. This was a very exploratory piece of work, and we were interested in local areas' reflections, challenges and interesting practice in achieving equitable support for families. We weren't doing a systematic survey or coming up with evidence-based recommendations for specific activities. The aim was much more to facilitate discussion and promote a focus on supporting minority ethnic families at every level. So what did we do? We conducted a survey and a round of 8 area-based focus groups. So these were in each of the regions of the country. And then we did a further round of 6 focus groups involving stakeholders from across the area. So we started to drill down into some of the themes that came out in the first round of focus groups. So the participants included local authority stakeholders such as commissioners, service leads, heads of service, directors from various teams and departments, including early help, educare, education, SEND, reducing parental conflict. We had people there from the police, from the NHS, domestic abuse support services, drug and alcohol services, as well as community and voluntary sector and other service providers, including those who worked around parenting and mental health. And then we did have a couple of evaluation partners who came as well, who were working with some of the local areas to evaluate their local projects. Before we talk through the learning about local solutions, we wanted to share some brief reflections about our wider learning from carrying out this work with the local areas. Anecdotally, we observed a wide range of levels of engagement and maturity in supporting minority ethnic families across the local authorities. There was a lot of variation. And likewise, there were a range of attitudes from those really passionate about embedding ready practice and opportunities for staff within their organisations to participants who were more unsure or who had a lot of questions. The focus groups themselves seem to be constructive, both in terms of helping stakeholders from the same area to talk and to identify points of disconnect, as well as for exchanging ideas between leaders in different local areas. And there were a range of interesting questions which local authorities were grappling with, including how to link up useful data across services and how to evaluate service delivery and impact for different communities. They also talked about how to best engage with voluntary and community sector service groups and how to use and apply evidence with very small communities. For us as a project team, it was also very helpful where we engaged in our own reflexive practice, which was a big learning curve. We thought about how our own professional experiences and personal stories impacted on how we approached this project. And during each phase of the project, we were when running and analysing the focus groups, we were doing this. We were doing the reflexive practice and thinking about what the implications would be for the project. The reflections that we captured are feeding into the development of our own foundation's EDI activities and strategy at the moment. Because of the exploratory nature of the report, rather than including firm conclusions, we included lots of question boxes that were scattered throughout the report, which we hope will be useful for local authority teams as a focus to facilitate reflection, discussion, and thinking on practices in their own area. So 3 key themes came out of this piece of work with regards to how local areas were working to achieve equitable support. The first theme was about how local areas were working to develop support systems which met the needs of local communities. Within this theme, there were 3 categories of actions that stakeholders were taking to do this. So the first was local areas shared how they were working to engage and build trust with communities within their local areas. For example, methods of engagement, which might have included the use of social media to reach and communicate with communities, going where communities go, even if that meant going to unconventional settings, working with parent champion advocates, and running local events which put families at the centre. Secondly, they also talked about how they were responding to the diverse needs of the families and children. So actions here included translating service materials and interventions, working with interpreters, working with community volunteers to form a bridge with communities, and making adaptations to existing services to create new specialised ones so that the local offer was better suited to the needs of those from different cultures and backgrounds. And then thirdly, participants talked about the importance of partnership working and how they were working with community and voluntary sector colleagues to build a more comprehensive support system. Examples given included involving partners in service design and delivery, establishing a wide range of networks, bringing support into one place, creating new referral pathways, commissioning and funding partner projects, and the joint organisation of workshops and events for children and families. The second key theme within the research was the role of the workforce in achieving equitable family support. Within this theme, we heard about the actions stakeholders saw as valuable to developing a workforce which can support diverse communities. We heard about the role of leadership and how some areas had dedicated roles or working groups that led on ready efforts and sometimes developed strategies or action plans. We also heard about the need for ready training for all staff and managers and how stakeholders attempted to put this into practice. Another key area stakeholders focused on was specific ready activities in the workplace, including celebrating diversity, but also ensuring minority ethnic staff members can access support when they themselves experience racism or discrimination. And lastly, we also heard about a range of recruitment initiatives, such as advertising more broadly, blind recruitment, and ensuring interview panels are diverse, as well as staff progression initiatives. We heard quite a bit about mentoring programs and targeted support for training programs to equip staff with the skills needed to progress to more senior roles, so that the workforce represented the diversity of the communities that they served across all levels of seniority. The third theme was about how local areas were using evidence. In our focus groups, we asked about how local areas were collecting and using evidence to support minority ethnic families. We heard about how they gathered data on local population needs and service uptake, for example, to identify whether there were certain groups which were underrepresented in services and to inform strategic planning. Some areas had started collecting more demographic information, or at a more fine-grained level, they could see where communities' needs were. One area talked about how they looked at their parents who were coming along to groups and services, and then those who started volunteering or even working in the services, if the proportions in those services. So if the proportions of those match the local population need that they'd done earlier, this will be an informal indicator that these services were working well for the different groups in the community. We also heard about local areas who were seeking family voices, whether through feedback forms or user experience questionnaires or in service user forums. We heard a lot were grappling with this in terms of how useful and representative they were, and the kinds of data that they were collecting. For example, one person said, we have a service user forum, which is obviously really important for us in terms of feedback on how we're doing as a service, which challenges what we're doing right, what we're not doing right, where we might be accessible for others and where we may not be. And that's where we get a bulk of our information from. However, giving weight to the voices of forum members might overlook others who are less likely to engage. And even with feedback forms, stakeholders were worried about how to hear the views of those who didn't return the form. Finally, we discussed how evidence can be used to understand the impact of services and to plan individual support. Overall, we heard a lot of challenges when generating evidence about family support. Examples given included lacking appropriate tools, struggling with the complexity of the demographic need and the volume of information, or being biased in interpreting the evidence that they had collected. One striking comment was came from one local authority where they said it was a very directive process, in that what communities are saying and what they're asking for is literally just heard on the basis of, well, what's realistic, what can we afford, and pretty much nothing else. So in the report, we made several policy and practice recommendations. These were targeted at national government, research organisations like ourselves, and local authorities and their partners. In terms of national government, we recommended raising the profile of work on race equality, diversity, inclusion and equity, emphasising the need for equitable service design and equality, diversity and inclusion in family policy. We also recommended national leadership on ways local areas can promote READY in their family support, building local capacity with an explicit focus on the key functions and roles which drive forward READY efforts, and incentivising local data to understand how local support is working for minority ethnic children and families. For research organisations, we recommended synthesis of evidence to understand what works for specific ethnic groups, evidence generation to fill evidence gaps, for example, where selected interventions have good evidence of improving outcomes, but it is unclear whether an approach will work for all ethnic groups. Applying an EDI lens through the entire process when conducting a research, and that's what we're very much looking at the moment, thinking about how we can apply the EDI lens through the end-to-end process of conducting a piece of research, so it's embedded in all that we do. And then for local authorities and partners, we recommended that they work with partners to gain a shared understanding of strengths and weaknesses of current provision, including feedback from families and their experiences. Also, the value of working with families, community leaders and community and voluntary sector organisations to develop a support offer that's responsive to the needs of children and families. And finally, we recommended evaluating improvements to service design or delivery to ensure that there's evidence of incremental improvement. So that's the three documents or reports that we've talked to you about today. The first one is the one that Steph talked to you about, Speak Out. The second one is the one I've just spoken about. And the third one is our strategy. So I'm sure that you'll be able to see this on the recording when you receive it. And I think Gail's got the slides as well if you wanted to be able to access the links. So looking forward to speaking to you in the Q&A.
Thank you so much, Jo and Steph. Yes, we've had a question asking for if we can share the slides. So we are going to, as Violetta said, we are actually going to share the slides. and the recording as well. We're going to send you out a link to be able to access those, and then we're going to put them on our website as well, so that if you've got colleagues that you want to share them with as well, that's absolutely fine. Has anybody got any questions for Jo or Steph? Any reflections on what you've heard today? You may either put your hand up or drop a note in the chat. So Farah, come on in.
Hi, I think this is a really piece of work. I'm from Somali Community Parents Association based in Leicester, and we really support families exactly facing what you had described it on your piece of presentation. Often lack of trust to access mainstream services, coming all the way to us, even though they're coming 5 miles away to meet with someone they understand, and they often misunderstood different mainstream services. So I think this is a really fits what we are observing here, our end, and I think it will help us to address locally to use this document. I mean, because it was very difficult for us to encapsulate, like how to put in a context exactly what people are facing that we day to day meet new arrivals with cross-sectional of issues, language barrier, lonely, low income, other issues on top of that, mental health issues, so many things, housing problems, private landlord, all exploitation, so many things going, but they need to understand what support they can access. It's very hard for them to access the mainstream service without considering their needs and working organizations like us. So thank you so much. It was really very touching information here. Very accurate though.
Thank you. That's a wonderful piece of feedback. Thank you so much for that. I'm sure Jo and Steph will appreciate that. I'm now going to bring in Teresia. Do you want to come in with your question?
Hi everyone. Just wanted to say a huge thank you. Like Abdikaif, I would definitely agree with how beautiful you covered the challenges and inequalities that children from underserved communities or different communities are more likely to face. I am Teresia. I am a Roma cultural consultant. I'm a teacher too, and we've got an organization called Café, Young People's Future, and we do non-formal education. One thing, just to sustain your points, what we've done with Welcoming Cultures, we have reconnected our young people with community teachers, and we have this program called My Community is a Teacher Too. And community members get the training and they go into schools, and then the young people get to reconnect and see the lived experience being valued from their own community. And then the second thing, what we've done is we're setting up a consortium looking at decolonizing the educational programs, not just history, but also arts. And there's around 10 groups that are focusing on anti-racist education. One thing that I didn't know if you've covered was the fact that children with a BME background are more likely to be excluded or more likely to be in a category of special needs and cognitive rather than bilingual. And that's what it's something that we always kind of try to focus on. And yeah, I think it's such an important work that you've done that can be shared further. So happy to share this further in our networks as well in the schools that we work with. It ultimately it's on building relationships and the communities getting to know our children's backgrounds and celebrate that. So we've put a community calendar together to encourage schools to celebrate history. But that sometimes head teachers don't really get it, and that's when the racist word comes in, because it I think with your help, that there were occasions where head teachers weren't necessarily feeling proud of being associated with specific community events in their own school. I don't know if you came across something like that. So my message was simple to the head teachers. Sometimes a simple smile means a lot to those communities, to those new arrivals. One more thing I would have loved to see is to cover the trauma, how children with adverse childhood trauma or children that, you know, come to us as refugees. So maybe if we can also look at something like this into this. But thank you ever so much for everything what you've covered so far.
Thank you, Teresia. Steph, Joe, do you want to come back on that?
I mean, thank you. It's so good to hear this positive feedback. And yeah, I mean, really important points. I think there's just so much more for us. This is just the start, really. I mean, there's so much more we'd like to be able to do and to look into. So very much the kind of beginning of a journey and a pretty broad sweep piece of research, really. So no, we didn't look into the kind of exclusion rates or the trauma point you raise is just so important. So, hopefully we can do more.
Thanks, Steph. That's great. And Teresia, somebody has put something in the chat. Let me just find out. Coraline has asked, would you mind sharing your email address in the chat? Because I think there's other people in the audience who are interested in the work that you described. That'd be great if you could do that. I'm going to bring in Nicola next. Nicola, coming in.
Hi everyone. So I'm from the Missing from Home team. So I work with parents when the children have gone missing from home. Unfortunately, it is the children from the ethnic minority backgrounds that do seem to get exploited and targeted. And when working with the families, what we come up against is because of trying to get a translator, we'd usually use a family member because they're frightened of bringing home shame upon the family around the community, even though it's not their fault. So it would be good. It's more of awareness raising that we're not, for the families, for the parents, because if they, like, we work with them to show them the risks and awareness of exploitation, and working with them is helping them support to notice, to see these signs. But it'd just be greater if there was sort of like, it's just trying to work, like you say, it's a slow process of trying to get translation in and trust. So that's what we come up against, unfortunately.
Thanks. A really good point, Nicola. Steph, Joe, do you want to come back in?
Yeah, I mean, that did come up quite a bit in the focus groups, actually, Nicola, when we spoke to partners from local authorities. There was a mixed views on the use of interpreters. Some local authorities said they kind of went with what families wanted, because for some they preferred a family member. Others wanted somebody who was apart from the family, so the family didn't know perhaps what was going on within the nuclear family. But also there were sometimes concerns about members of the community being interpreters as well, and then the family having to talk about their issues, and then how confidential did they feel that was going to be when it was fed back to the practitioner that was there with them. So yeah, I think there are a variety of ways of doing it, but in local areas seem to be finding different ways of getting around it, and it's something obviously we want to know a little bit more about. What we could we suggest to others that might be a useful way of doing it. But I think the answer is it probably has to be a lot more nuanced and depending on the circumstances of the family.
Thank you, Joe. That's great. And just to raise Ekwa's point in the chat, really good point, Ekwa. Just to read it out to people. At times, the research process can be frustrating for the individuals involved. Sometimes service users don't get any feedback or direct support from the outcomes, and they might have left the service at this point. Is that something you found, Joe and Steph, at all, as part of the feedback?
in the project that I was involved with, the second piece of work we did feedback to the local authorities about the work and what we found, and we did give them a sneak preview of the report, and they could make amends if they felt that there was something that wasn't very representative. So we did try to go back to people before we made the report publicly available. And we also had an advisory group as well that supported us with the work to make sure that it was going to be of benefit.
Yeah, and
Perfect.
similarly
Thank
on the
you, Jo.
first piece, sorry, Gail, talking over you. On the first piece, we dipped our toe in the water really, so we tried quite hard on comms, and we worked with a comms agency to try and do exactly this, so that people did feel, that there was some feedback from their input in the research and so on. We tried, we could probably do better, I think, but we did at least endeavour to keep people involved and informed, and again, kind of before the final report was published, shared those findings back through our sort of web-based communication channels.
Thanks, Steph. Echo, do you want to come back in on that?
Yeah, I just wanted to say that yeah, I get what you're saying in it, and it does make sense, but I think quite often it goes back to the local authority or the professionals that are involved, and actually due to a lack of funding or a lack of time and stuff, it doesn't actually go back to the people that actually took part in it. So it may be that you've evaluated something and this would work better, but at that point they've left the service, so it doesn't directly impact on them. And so when that keeps happening a lot, which it does because there's lots and lots of research, you get a tendency where people go, well, I'm giving loads of information, I'm not getting anything back. The things that I'm complaining about are not getting addressed, but I'm still being taken advantage of because I'm still filling in questionnaires, and then there's a resistance, and then within the community there's a resistance. So I think we need to find a better way of encouraging people to take part, and then having something after that that actually appreciates them taking part. Otherwise it feels like you're doing a lot of taking and not giving back, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely, Echo. I think really point well made. Absolutely. It's important that the people receive feedback. Otherwise, it adds to the lack of trust and feeling of disrespect that was mentioned earlier. I'm going to bring Leandra in now. Leandra from the Race Equality Foundation has got a really interesting presentation to share with us. And then there will be opportunity to ask Leandra questions. And also, if you think of anything else for Steph and Jo, there'll also be time at the end as well for further questions there. So come on in, Leandra.
Great, thank you. Can everyone see the presentation?
Yeah, we can see it, Leandra.
Great.
And Leandra, what I should say, just everybody, there is an audio section in Leandra's presentation. You might need to turn up the volume on your own computer. When we tested it earlier, we could hear it, but it was quite low. So just to pre-warn before we get to that bit.
Yeah, thanks very much for that, Gail. Good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to join you at this event. As you've already heard, my name's Leandra Box. I lead on our families work at the Race Equality Foundation. So a major part of this is the Strengthening Families, Strengthening Communities family of interventions, which includes our in-person parenting programme and the suite of curriculum resources that run alongside this, to allow for delivery in specific settings and for specific needs. It also includes our introductory online course, our stronger relationship courses focused on reducing parental conflict, and our young people's programme. But today I'm going to be focusing on the parenting intervention. And I've got a bit of a cold, so excuse me if I sneeze and cough. So a bit about the Race Equality Foundation, first of all. So we're a national charity. Our mission is to tackle racism and racial inequality in public services, and we do that in sort of three broad ways. We generate and share evidence and best practice of what works to dismantle systemic racism, and we work specifically through the lens of intersectionality. We try to influence policymakers, decision makers, and practitioners and drive change. and we initiate and collaborate in partnerships and networks, trialling new ways of working and supporting the communities we work with to tackle racism. And while we work with a whole range of agencies, we believe strongly in the role of the voluntary community and faith sector in both tackling inequality and providing support to Black, Asian and minority ethnic families. So the colleague who spoke earlier about the role that his organisation plays in the Somali community, we find that to be really key. And so we work very closely with those organisations. We've delivered a range of projects, many of which explore the lived experience of minoritised people, from the lives of young people living with disability to older people living with dementia. We continue our efforts to progress race equality through demonstrating what is possible. So an example of this would be our work on improving blood pressure testing for African and Caribbean men through the use of community facilities such as barbershops. And we intervene in a range of national debates that impact our communities, as seen through our work on mental health, with the COVID-19 inquiry and the independent inquiry into child sexual abuse, amongst others. So what I'm going to be talking about today, I think firstly, the kind of title of this session was around culturally sensitive services. So I think it's important that I say something about the use of this term, first of all, and then something about the needs of young people and their families at risk of violence. I know my colleagues at foundations have been talking about this, and I think some of the things I say will really resonate with the things that they have already. But our practice is always to centre the voice of the communities we serve. This would usually be with the inclusion of those people as part of the presentation. But today you're just going to get me and some film footage, I'm afraid. Unfortunately, the timing of this event made it very difficult to get parents doing school runs or young people who are often at school at this time to attend this, but would have liked to have. Then I'm going to tell you a bit about the Strengthening Families, Strengthening Communities approach. So it's an inclusive parenting intervention designed to meet the needs of Black, Asian and minority ethnic families. And lastly, I'll tell you a bit about the work that we're currently doing with the Youth Endowment Fund in this space. So that's the plan for today. So what about culture then? I think the term culturally sensitive is used frequently in a number of different sort of shapes and forms, whether we're talking about, culturally appropriate, culturally competent, culturally aware, we talk about cultural humility, the list is endless. But my question is, who are we talking about here? What are we talking about and who? And the fact that everyone has a culture, so but we know that we're here really to talk about minoritised young people and their families. So for me, what we're getting at is being inclusive. It's about meeting needs, making sure that services are accessible and appropriate. And I think there's a risk with the focus on culture that kind of problematises people rather than the structures and systems that they're operating within. And I just wanted to sort of issue a word of caution with these terms that place family structures and culture firmly at the roots of differences in experience or in inequalities, and the consequence of which can be to imply that minority ethnic families are themselves the reason for the inequalities. And we had a sense of this with the Sewell report, so the report for the Commission on Ethnic Disparities that came out in the last few years, which highlighted the importance of parenting, but it managed to recast issues of disadvantage as problems of individual behaviour and cultural norms rather than getting to the fundamental causes of inequalities. So I just wanted to say that's why you probably won't hear me talking about cultural sensitivities much in this presentation. And another issue is that a focus on culture can lead to some sort of practitioner stereotyping practices, a bit of a checklist approach that encourages assumptions rather than engagement of the individual and a response to their needs. So last point really is to say that if we want to focus on the impact of culture for minoritised groups, and I think better to focus on the culture of agencies and workforces that provide services to our communities, and talk about what we can do to change these to make them more inclusive. So now I can get into the meat of things, and I can get off my soapbox. I want to move into thinking briefly about the context for minority ethnic communities. And we all know, or should know, the picture, and this slide highlights just a few headlines. So, you know, nearly half of ethnic minority children are living in poverty compared to 20% of children in white British families. On average, people from minority ethnic groups have lower incomes, higher unemployment, more likely to live in overcrowded accommodation than their white counterparts. So often the fundamental causes of these inequities relates to disadvantage and racial discrimination. So, for example, despite improving educational attainment, for many ethnic minority people are still experiencing increased rates of unemployment, reduced occupational attainment, and pay disparities. And alongside these policies, you know, such as the benefit cap and the hostile environment for immigration, we know that these sort of impact minority families disproportionately. And minorities, particularly Black people, are also significantly overrepresented in the criminal justice system. And this isn't necessarily due to higher offending rates, but the result of, you know, disproportionate use of stop and search and harsher sentencing practices. So rates of social inequality and deprivation are very closely associated with the risks of experiencing violence. So the 2021 report by the Office for National Statistics identified that there was a 68% rise in homicide rates for Black victims, for example. There's a disproportionate risk for minoritized young people and growing evidence of the failure to intervene early in the experience of violence. So this was identified in the inspectorate report of the criminal justice system, looking at the experience of Black and mixed heritage boys. So just to say, you know, that's the context within which families are living, and it's not comprehensive by any means, but I just wanted to give a snapshot of that before we heard from parents themselves talking about what their concerns are when it comes to violence. So I'm going to play the video. Please put your volume up, and I'm hoping that you can hear it. Let me know if it's not coming through.
I think perhaps someone's just knocked it off. Sorry, Leandra, you carry on.
No, that's all right. So crucial to the work that we've been doing has been the voice of the families that we work with and the practitioners who work with those families. And most recently, this has been heard through our parent advisory group and our young people's advisory group that we work with. But for more than 20 years, we've been engaged in conversations and projects that are focused on families at risk of violence. So that's from engaging families around the development of this programme to the piloting of this project, where we focused on young people at risk from the very start, working with Dalston Youth Project as we were piloting the programme back in 2000, to designing projects to better inform strengthening families by hearing the voices of young people, to work in specific spaces such as work around gang involvement or working with young people in prison settings, as we've been doing most recently. So that really brings me to talking about strengthening families. And like any good parenting model, we're about promoting protective factors, lowering risk factors, and building strong, warm, and nurturing relationships. But I want to start where parents start, which is where the arrow is pointing, with our building blocks, and tell you about the aim of the programme, because it sets out a really clear commitment to tackling violence, which is at the top of that diagram. It's the very goal of the programme. Parents see these building blocks that you see here at the start and at the end of every session, and often in between. They are clear about the aims of the programme, and also the very basis of getting there, which starts with that bottom block, which emphasises, I'm not sure if it's big enough on your screens, but it emphasises the importance of our ethnicity, our culture, our faith for those of us who have them, and our families and family life, really. So a quick overview of how this looks. Strengthening Families, Strengthening Communities is a structured, manualised programme. It's a curriculum that runs over 39 hours of delivery over 13 weeks. Each session is delivered by 2 trained facilitators. There are a range of different activities, including small and large group discussions, role play, tasks and activities to do at home. As an evidence-based model, programme fidelity is key, but facilitators are encouraged to meet the needs of parents in the room and offer flexibility within the curriculum. Our team is available to offer advice about how this might look whilst maintaining programme fidelity. The programme's accompanied by a quality assurance process. Delivery takes place in a range of settings and a range of community languages, and materials are available in 20 different languages and a range of formats. So it's open to all, but we continue to see our target group as minoritized families, and we work from the principle that if you get it right for some of the most poorly served groups, you are more likely to get it right for everyone. So it's not a programme that's only for minority parents. Everyone is welcome. We just are very clear that those are the groups that we want to make sure engage and have access to this kind of support. We work across the age ranges, but have facilitator materials and guidance that allows targeted delivery to particular age groups, so parents of teens, for example. We deliver in a range of settings, as I had mentioned previously, so that might be education, health, youth justice, social care. Again, I want to emphasise that we see a really crucial role for the voluntary community and faith sector, who often have relationships of trust with the communities we want to serve and offer the flexibility necessary to meet needs. So the way we approached developing the service was about engaging in the first instance a wide range of parents and practitioners so that we could look at every aspect of the design, development and deployment of the programme. It's an evidence-based approach. We explored the evidence around engagement of parents that services find hard to reach. We looked at understanding what the needs and experiences were of these groups, what barriers existed to taking up services, what types of solutions had been used in other services and sectors. We designed a criteria of what an inclusive programme would look like as a result of looking at what the research evidence says, examples of programmes from around the world, feedback from parents, and working with a group of practitioners and minoritised parents to develop the curriculum. Each aspect of the programme was carefully crafted with inclusivity at its core, so it was there from the very start. In terms of the curriculum, the value base of parents is the starting point. Remember the building blocks I shared earlier. So how does their ethnic, cultural, spiritual and family roots underpin what they do, the choices they make, the goals they set, and so on. We connect this throughout to the curriculum. We look at a range of wider issues. So it's important to go beyond the parent-child relationship and behaviour management to what impacts family lives. Those broader issues that are really significant to minority families, whether they're discrimination, harassment, poor housing, low income, and so on. It's taking account of those issues that are important to the communities that we serve. And valuing and validating difference throughout the curriculum. So including examples and information that is relevant and resonates to the families that we work with. So, for example, in family structure, talking about the role of extended family, for example. In terms of the materials, we demand that no level of literacy is required to participate. Everything's delivered verbally by the facilitators. As I mentioned, the materials are available in 20 different languages. We have materials in Braille, large print, and easy words and pictures, for example, for parents with learning disabilities. So it's about just removing the barriers, really. On training, from the inception, we've considered what individuals should deliver the programme, what skills and experiences they should have, what agencies should deliver, and how we can make sure the workforce is diverse. And this has meant we've targeted our training to ensure we include male practitioners, those with community language skills, those working in the voluntary and community sector, as well as having a policy of training parents who have attended programmes. So that is not just exclusive to professionals. And by the way, this is not really a money-making endeavour when you train in groups like that, because they're not the groups that have money to pay for training. But we do know that if parents that have been marginalised identify with the people leading the group, it can make a difference to them getting through the door. And once they're there, it's much easier to hold on to people and get them coming back. Our training to practitioners models this inclusive approach. It builds on strengths, it's non-judgmental, it values difference, it challenges stereotypes. We promote equality and anti-discriminatory practice throughout. The training specifically addresses inclusion. And we provide ongoing training for facilitators as well, so that this focus on equality and inclusivity can continue with new materials that we develop to support parents with learning disabilities, for example, or parents with a neurodiverse child, which is our latest edition. Support high quality and inclusive delivery and deployment of a programme like this requires an ongoing monitoring and support process. So providing guidance to agencies and facilitators around inclusive delivery, making sure that quality assurance processes promote it is really key. Last couple of things are evidence and dissemination, and just wanted to say a quick word about that really. So it really is the case that to be serious about inclusion and meeting the needs of Black, Asian and minority ethnic young people and their families at risk of violence, it is to be serious about monitoring, recording what you do and how you do it, reviewing data, adapting what you do in the light of this. We are transparent about who we are reaching and where work remains to be done. We use a range of processes to review the curriculum, our delivery model, our resources, and to include our stakeholders in these discussions. We use quality assurance processes and supervision with delivery staff to reflect on and improve their delivery all the time. And then the issue of building lived experience into any research and evaluation, really crucial. We do this as a matter of course with all our work now. And I had lots to say about the question earlier on about research and feedback to participants on that. It really is crucial. It can be difficult though, if you're doing a 5-year study as we are at the moment, people have to wait a long time to get to the point of reports and being able to feed back on that. So it's about thinking innovatively about how you can do it along the way. And lastly, dissemination, really. It's vital that we share good practice that we're engaged in. We do this with our practitioners and our agencies delivering the programme to improve the model. We do it across our own organisation to use the lessons learned to inform the development of other projects and to link up with other programmes of work. We do it across the sector, so we're able to share good practice, and we work with other parenting programmes as well through the Parenting Programme Alliance, for example. So I just wanted to have a few visuals so you're able to see what all of that I've just said looks like in practice. So it looks like this. This is remembering the goal, which is violence-free lifestyles, families and communities. And this is parents involved in an activity in the group where they're looking at their community vision and they're exploring what it means to live in a violence-free community and what that might look like. So yeah, that's one thing. This is nurturing environment. Food is key. Relationships are key. Building supportive, nurturing networks is key. Delivering in spaces and at times that work for parents, crucial. So this is a programme taking place in a community venue, a pop-up in South London. It's not a statutory agency. It's not somewhere you go when you're in trouble. It's not somewhere you go when you see a worker you don't want to see. It's open, anyone can go there, it's comfortable, it's warm, it's dark outside, as you can see, which means the programme's taking place at night, which is when this group of parents can access it because they're working parents. So this is what I mean about the sort of flexibility and meeting people where they're at. Good quality childcare, colleagues mentioned this earlier on, really important. This is a programme that's taking place on a Saturday in a church setting in West London. Currently, actually, they're about 4 weeks in, and this is what their childcare looks like. This is about recognising achievements and supporting parents to celebrate and making it special. Many of the parents that attend this course, this will be the first positive experience of education they will have had. So it's really important that we recognise it. It's 13 weeks. It's an enormous commitment. So with very busy lives. So we celebrate that. And this was all organised by the parents themselves. This is not us. This is them deciding how they want to celebrate, receive their certificates. And as you can see, it looks pretty special. So around half of those who attend the programme are Black, minority ethnic parents, increasing to more than 80% in London boroughs. It's a diverse group spanning established communities and newly arrived ones. Families who attend strengthening families suffer high levels of deprivation, with 2/3 having household incomes below the poverty line. We work with young parents, we work with lone parents. About 43% of those who attend are lone parents. Alongside that, we have grandparents or other family members, we have foster carers, we have step parents attend. So I don't have a lot of time to talk about impact and evaluation in any detail, just letting you know that there are numerous reports online, or you can drop me a line. I'm happy to bore you extensively with how we've evaluated and what they say. But just to say that monitoring and evaluation have been integral throughout, and we've done this in lots of different ways, all of which have provided useful insights. And these are a few of the areas that we've been able to demonstrate impact on this visual. So from the difference the programme makes the confidence and competencies of parents, to the impact on relationships, both parent-child and other adult relationships, reductions in physical chastisement of children, greater understanding of the impact of violence, to greater confidence in discussing challenging subjects such as sex and relationships and gangs. But we continue to explore issues of inclusion and grow the evidence base. And we hope to continue to find out more about the impact of the programme with our work with the Youth Endowment Fund, which is what I come to now. And we're hoping that this will help us improve the way we engage with families that could benefit from the programme. We are doing this work, feasibility study currently that we're involved in partnership with UCL and City University, as well as Youth Endowment Fund. We're looking specifically at how strengthening families can better work with parents of 11 to 18-year-olds engaged in violence, offending, antisocial behaviour, or are gang involved. The first stage, as I said, is this feasibility study. We're midway through it now. And the purpose of this is both to test out methodological questions around referral routes, how we communicate the programme and study. So given that our target population is a stigmatised group who are likely to have had negative experiences with statutory agencies, and particularly how we gain consent and collect data from young people as well, because that's another aspect of this work. And this is also challenging as they're not directly receiving a service through our parenting programme. It's their parents who are. And by the nature of their inclusion in this work, they're some of the most stigmatised, vulnerable and marginalised young people. So it's not straightforward getting them to answer our questions, but that's what we're testing out at the moment to see how we can do this and do it well. We also want to make some minor adjustments to the curriculum, some of which we've been considering for some time. So that was our sort of ongoing feedback loop I was referring to previously. So we've got lots of ideas about what we wanted to do anyway, but we've also run some stakeholder groups through September and October this year, which have been attended by parents. We've also run a specific group with young people in Hackney who've been helping us think about how we do this work. And following this, which is due to complete in the spring and summer of the 2024, next year, and completion of the study I mentioned a moment ago, which is a 5-year study funded by the National Institute for Health Research and is reporting also in the summer. We are hoping to run a 3-year impact study for this same group of same cohort, informed by the learning from these 2 pieces of research. So we look forward to sharing the journey we are on with the Youth Endowment Fund with you further as we go along. And I think at that point, I will just finish up by saying that this last slide contains my contact details in case any of you want to drop me a line about any of this work or anything else that I might have mentioned or that the Race Equality Foundation might be doing. But also there's a link to our website if you wanted to take a further look at the Strengthening Families information. And lastly, there's a link in the middle there to our online courses that parents can sign up to if you wanted to signpost anyone to us. So I'll leave it there and look forward to some discussions with you all.
Thank you so much, Leandra. That was a really, really interesting presentation. And just from the comments in the chat, it's obviously resonated with a lot of people. People have been asking for your email address, and obviously it's on the last slide. So I think people will be getting in touch. I'll bring people in a sec, but I'll just to summarise, there's a few questions from the chat. Somebody has asked, is this available in Manchester? And what is your referral pathway? Somebody else has asked whether you address child criminal exploitation as a topic as part of the programme. So shall we start with that, and then we'll move to questions from others?
Yes, Manchester. Yes, it does run in Manchester. There's we work in partnership with some voluntary sector organisations there. The Caribbean and African Health Network are about to start delivery of programmes, but also Manchester Early Help do have SFSE trained practitioners and do use it within the early help side of things, although less so than they used to, because I think their funding cuts have meant that they're much likely to do shorter courses than one as long as ours. Referral pathways we're very much an open access service. That's how we like to think of it. We deliver programmes ourselves in various settings, but we also work in partnership with lots of agencies. We train practitioners in different services and sectors to deliver the programme. That means those services may have restrictions on who can access it, and that's down to those services and what their remits are. But when we deliver it, we like it to be open access. And so we like to take referrals from anyone who will refer, any kind of agency, and for parents to self-refer as well. So our preference is a mix. With the work we're doing with the Youth Endowment Fund, because of the nature of the cohort, we are working primarily with youth offending services, youth justice services, but we also connect to community organisations that are working with families affected by those issues so that parents can access it. But we tend to not advertise as widely as we would with other programmes, and we would use a range of different ways to promote. So you put information where parents go to, and that can be the local school, the GP surgeries and so on, but it can be the hair salon, the takeaways that are in the local area. We put information up anywhere and everywhere, and are really interested in sort of innovative ways to share information. We use lots of WhatsApp groups, for example, to get, and we we get parents to be the biggest advocates. So parents who've done the programme, we ask them to put information out through their networks because they're the ones who other parents are most likely to listen to. And was it child exploitation? Was that the last question? It is included in the programme, yeah. So we look at all issues around sort of community safety, risk, and violence for young people. So it does get touched on within that, yes.
Fantastic, thank you. I'm going to bring Abdikaif in now. I know, Abdikaif, you were asking about the Somali language, but you might have another question as well.
Yes, thank you, Leona. This is really, again, another touching presentation for the work we do. I mean, parenting, and family and younger people strengthening relationship is really something we see as a highly need in Leicester. We are based in Leicester. So my first question is you know, the parenting program 13 weeks. Is the 20 community languages included Somali language? That's my first question.
Yeah.
And if we wanted to access some of your programs, training, we are based in Leicester. How can we access it? And does it cost anything? Or what is the use of your resources and facilities, expertise? Yeah. So.
Okay.
And what is the two things that you, in your understanding of working with ethnic minority families, what are the 2-3 things that makes younger people to end up criminal justice? I mean, what is the main, you gather it kind of the 3 things you think is the main driven things to criminal justice, to your involvement, just to get idea.
Okay. So in terms of what you asked about, the materials are available in Somali. It gets delivered by quite a lot of Somali organisations, and I can send you through some information on costings and training. And our most recent newsletter, I think, had a piece in with a Somali organisation talking about using the programme, so I can share that with you as well if you just put your email address in the chat.
I did. It is in the chat.
Okay,
yeah.
brilliant. I'll have a look and send that through. In terms of the drivers around youth crime, I haven't got all the research at my fingertips, but what I would say is what parents talk about most in the programs and that was raised in the videos I talked about. So people talk regularly about the kinds of peer groups that people are in, and we know that what becomes more important to young people as they get older is the influences outside the family. So they're more interested in those areas and what what other people think of them. So parents will often talk about that. Education and the number of young people who are from minority groups that are excluded from schools, who have special educational needs, we know are particularly vulnerable. We know that there are some. We know that young people are more at risk of criminal activities if they have older siblings who are already involved, or have family members who are involved too. And obviously, you know, poverty is a big driver for crime. If families and young people have very little hope, they're not able to see a future where they've got good jobs, for example, that can also contribute. So there's a number of different issues, and there are some good articles about it, which I'm also happy to share if that would be useful.
Thanks, Leandra. We are rapidly running out of time, so I'm going to quickly. I'm just Abdika, Kelly Reed in the chat has said that she has got information about this particular programme that's been delivered to the Somali community, and it was a really positive experience. So you might actually want to exchange email addresses as well. I'm just going to bring Connie, do you want to come in? I know you've not come in before with your question. We've probably just got about time for another one.
Thank you. I've actually just written it in the chat, so I'll try and make it really short. I'm increasingly professionally curious about the impact of our physiology on our own individual well-being, but very much in terms of our ability to have positive relationships, manage stress in those relationships. And I think it's something we're increasingly aware of as, you know, individuals and society, and how we include that in our work. And I was interested to find out if Strengthening Families, Strengthening Communities includes that in your curriculum, and if so, how, and how is it received? And I'm thinking particularly of some of the building blocks around, you know, rest, sleep, nutrition, movement, the use of technology, breathing even as a way of managing stress. Sorry, that wasn't very quick, and it's not going to be answered in 2 minutes. So
I'll be quick. It does include it. It's something we are quite keen to do some more on, actually. We've been exploring it a bit with the lived experience group around neurodiversity that we've been hosting recently. But it certainly does. We talk about we have this whole section on the rites of passage, and it looks at every aspect of individuals' needs from, you know, mental, social, emotional, and so on. And so it covers things like how we experience stress, how we can better relax. We also look at we did a study recently where we were able to demonstrate the program has an impact on sleep, because we know how important sleep is to well-being and outcomes. So it does get covered in a number of different ways, and I'm happy to have a conversation with you outside of this where I can talk you through what that looks like. But the short answer is yes, it is all in there because it is absolutely crucial.
Thanks, Leandra. Now we've run out of time, and I know we've still got some questions. So I think if you've got any specific questions, just drop Leandra a line. I know there's a couple of questions about if you deliver in particular areas around the country, Leandra. Just seeing your point echo about family group conferencing, absolutely agree with you. And I know colleagues from foundations would as well, that's a really effective tool. So yeah, really good point. Thank you so much, everybody, speakers and all attendees. There's been some fantastic feedback in the chat. I think both from foundations and from Race Equality Foundation, people have found this amazingly useful. Do please contact our speakers directly if you need any further information, and you will be getting copies as well of the you know, the links to the slides and to the recording. So have a lovely rest of afternoon, and it was good to see you all.